3 of the x variables and the y variable. 2 of them had positive correlations, 1 had a negative correlation. We tested the significance of that correlation and saw that they were significant. So the next step that we want to do is run the regression model and see how each of those x variables in the presence of the other x variables affect weekly sales. So we ran the regression model here, and the first thing that we took a look at is our r squared, which was 86%. It was pretty high. So those 3 x variables explain 86% of the variation in weekly sales. Our regression model tells us we have a y-intercept of, or we have an intercept of 3,224. Square footage adds $1.34 per square foot. Having a college nearby adds $450 in weekly sales, and having a drive-through reduces weekly sales by $580. And again, these are the effects of each of these variables in the presence of all the other variables. And these are kind of what we expected from looking at the scatter plots you saw before. You can see that having a drive-through actually reduces your weekly sales. So the signs are going in the right direction, but we're going to test for multicollinarity later. So the first thing we want to do right now is now test this regression model and make sure that the overall model is significant. So we're going to look at doing an F test. Here you can see the F from the model is 101.8. Now, unfortunately, when we ran our Minitab in our Excel, it didn't give us the 101.8. It left it blank. Fortunately, a couple days ago, we learned that we can calculate this. If Minitab happens to leave numbers blank, we can calculate it ourselves. So we did that, MSR divided by MSE. And that was lucky because we had to move on to this F test, and we needed to have that value. So that could be on the final. Okay, so our F test.
Was that Minitab that did
that? That was actually Excel, but
I thought
Minitab wouldn't do that. But Professor Plan would. So using a significance level of 0.01, degrees of freedom of 3, and second degree of freedom of 49, that's what we're going to use on the F test. Our hypothesis test is that B1, B2, beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3 are all equal to 0, meaning there is no significance. And the alternate hypothesis is that at least one of them isn't 0. So at a 0.01 significance level, the critical F is 4.21. And our decision rule, if F from the model is greater than 4.21 or less than negative 0.421, then we will reject the null and conclude that the regression equation is significant. And we saw before that our F is 101.8, which is greater than 4.21, so we reject the null and conclude that the overall model is significant. Now, we want to make sure that, I didn't point out the p-values in the regression model, but they were all very close to 0. We want to make sure that nothing is distorting any of these values, that none of the x variables are interacting to distort those variables, so we're going to do a test of multicollinarity, and the VIFs for all of them are less than 5. So again, at the bottom we can see that we don't believe multicollinarity is a problem, and we're going to rely on that model. So, conclusion. The regression equation using all 3 of those variables is the best predictor we have right now of weekly sales given the data that's been collected. On the positive side, the square footage does increase weekly sales. The stores near a college campus can expect increased sales of about $450. On the negative side, again, management was expecting $5 in weekly sales, and we've shown that that's not a reasonable expectation. Drive-thrus decrease weekly sales by $580, and that was pointed out in the case that they thought that might be because they thought that might take away the coffee house experience that the customers had. So maybe they want to go sit down and read the paper while they're drinking their coffee. Other X variables may exist out there. Is there proximity to a shopping mall? Is there a Starbucks nearby that's bringing your sales down? What about the per capita income of the people who live in that area? Does that affect your weekly sales? So those are other areas that management should go out and look at. But again, we had a R squared of 86% compared to the single regression that these guys did, which was 66%. So the addition of those 2 variables explain much more of the variation in weekly sales. And then finally, candy. Candy is good. You eat it. Look. Hugs. Kiss Me, Hugs by Brogan, Doran. So, any questions?
Was that your
Any questions on this?
Yeah, I do have one. Can you go back to the drive-through?
Back to the candy slide.
Stay there.